Hello. I wanted to go into something that I discussed in my last video on cities being split off from counties and their effects on them. And so I wanted to do a deep dive and really dig deep into what the effects are on communities in general when this happens, especially in the US, because we have a number of independent cities that are neither consolidated nor are they a part of a county. Made, they have been separated from the county. And I know that we have a number of them, such as I know that Richmond, Virginia is that way. I know that there's a couple of others in Virginia. Unfortunately, I was not able to do that deep dive because it turns out that that is not something that really happens here. We have a very we have an outlier case in the state of Virginia, which in 1871 their state constitution said, okay, if you want to be a city, then you're independent of this of the county, and they get their own courts and all that stuff. I depending on the level of city, if it's like a grade one city or something. It's like they get both a district and circuit court, and if it's a level two, get like a then they get like their district court, but the circuit court is like part of the circuit court of another county. So there's a couple of distinctions there, but that's like an outlier, right? They're the only state that does that. There's the city of Baltimore, Maryland, which was established as a separate, which was set up as a I would I like to say the Washington D.C. of Baltimore of Maryland, like not a part of subject to the state, but not a part of any county. And that was done, I want to say, in 1859, I want to say. And so that was also before anything what you might call the modern era. And I was more interested in looking at modern era. And it turns out that there are two cities that something like that has been done with that I could find that were like relevant to this. One of them, Carson City, Nevada, which actually was had something else was done with that, where they first consolidated with the county and then they took the city independent. So it was not separating from the county, it was subsumed with the county, which is also another kind of thing that another trend that happened during the 20th century, which was unification of county and city government into one governmental body. Because I mean, if you have an urban area and it's all urbanized, then what do you need a county for when the city takes up all the territory? So you have like across the way we have a unified Jackson sorry unified Johnson County, Kansas City, Kansas uh, 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 unified government. And I know that Indianapolis, the 1970s, or Zunigov, where where the municipal and county authorities were consolidated. Although it was a except for the emergency responders and the education systems and all that, which were left like separate to the various townships around there, which was a weird case relating to like trying to control Indianapolis and not and related to like desegregation and trying to actually fight efforts on desegregation in certain ways. Keep the white suburbs white. Um, but that so not all of these are kind of like straightforward things, right? This is something that has a lot of there's a lot of different permutations, and in everything that I looked up, there was only one time where there was really a where a city was separated from the rest of the county under similar circumstances. Well, and in the way that that they're talking about doing for Kansas City, Missouri, and that is the city of St. Louis. And St. Louis is kind of, I mean, that's a very special kind of town. I mean, it was started by the French, right? It was started by the French, taken over by the Spanish around what 1600, I want to say, something like that. The French got it back from the Spanish in like 1803 maybe, and then Napoleon was thought about invading the U.S. but instead decided to just say screw it, I'm just going to sell it to the U.S. And he sold Louisiana, um, which included um, the yeah, St. Louis. So the French, then the Spanish, and the French, and then finally the Americans we've had ever since. Now, of course, the area had been inhabited for a long time before that. The reason why it's such a major city and so successful is because of its location at the confluence of like you had the Missouri River coming from the north, you had the Mississippi River from the north, you have the Missouri River from the west, which drains a huge amount of land. Then you have the Ohio River, which is also in the area, coming in from the east, which also drains a huge area. And rivers were the highway of, well, pretty much everybody before there were highways. It was how you got stuff to things. The Mississippian culture was named the Mississippian culture by us because almost all their settlements were located along the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, the Missouri River, because it made transportation and logistics so much easier. And so St. Louis has always been a very important city for as area for as long as people have been around. But it's important to us right now because it is the one example of a city that has been separated from its county that I can find in a way that is kind of analogous what they want to do with us. Now, why would you do this? Well, from the perspective of a city, you have a large tax base, right? And then but you're subject to city taxes, and usually you're also subject to county taxes, but you're not getting your benefits from the county, you're getting them from living in the city. So why would you be paying into those funds of taxes when you're really not going to see any benefit to it yourself? And that's one of the arguments in favor of splitting it up. But of course, what that means is that you leave the county without that urban tax base, and they had been having that urban tax base, and that means that you're going to get bad feelings because they set things up in a way that was like, at the time financially and fiscally appropriate because they had this larger tax base, and suddenly they don't. And what can easily happen is that they just don't they can't maintain their infrastructure, things fall apart. But what also happens is, how do we define communities? And this is an interesting thing, I think, because I mean my background is in anthropology. And so what is a community? How do you define a community? And a lot of times today, when we think of community, it's things that we self-identify as, like, oh, somebody may be a member of the gaming community, they may be a member of a church community, they may be a member of, I don't know, kink community, whatever. Lots of different types of communities out there, depending on what you do, where you go, how you identify, in terms of, you know, all sorts of different all sorts of various dimensions of oh, come on, dimensions of no difference differences that people just that they use to identify themselves as saying, I'm connected with these people and I'm connected with these people over here. And, we go and play soccer on the weekends, or we go and do this on the weekends, or whatever. And there are all these different communities, but they're all things that we kind of identify ourselves. But what we don't have really are we kind of forget that for a long, long time, people were fairly sedentary, you know. Today is nothing really to just pick up and move, but and there's especially on the what used to be the American frontier. It's also, you kind of have this tradition of people constantly moving in because that's what people do. And I know that with my generation, which is Generation X, our parents often moved around quite a bit in order to like climb the corporate ladder or whatever. They're were it's and that allowed a lot of things to kind of be it redefined who we who how we are, what communities we say we're a part of. But one of the most important ones for purposes of governance, for purposes of economics and transactions and things like that, is where do you live? Where do you live? Where do you work? Who sets the rules that you live by, that you work by, what who determines what your tax money goes to, and all those things are determined by community as in a local jurisdiction. And that's historically been very powerful because if you live in this area, then you are subject to certain rules here. This is where you pay your taxes, this is where you get your services from, and everybody who lives outside of that area, they don't participate. But also, what that also means is that now, and there have been studies of like, for example, let's take gated communities, for example. They tend to be very much insular. You build that gated community, you put that wall and those gates there, and suddenly you have a very different community inside than outside, and not necessarily for the better. Not necessarily for the better. There's a lot of them where the crime is actually higher inside than outside, and the reason is because psychologically, this is my community. I see that barrier, and I don't cross it as readily, even when I'm going to cause trouble. The difference is, who do you call? You pick up do you call the security company that maintains it, or do you call the police? Well, if you live in a gated community and somebody's doing vandalism or, something like that, or even robbing a house, and you're like, hey, this person's robbing a house. Typically, you are not calling the police. You're calling the security company that's on premises, and they work things out with the homeowners association so that nothing actually gets reported. And uh, and so that can mean that gated communities can actually have higher incidences of crime than the area around it, even though the area around it may have more police calls and stuff. It's just that the crime doesn't get reported officially. And and that's one of the things that we have that as an anthropologist, as somebody who like looks at historical records, who loves looking at these things and kind of looking at history and how things evolved, is who's keeping the records, where are things being reported to. And sometimes they're, because you have a city and you have a county now and they're split up and they're not trading records and all that, they could be documenting very different things, or they could be documenting the same thing in two completely different ways and make them look like two different things. And so when you're looking at historical things like the water can get muddied very easily. But the fact is that you now have a community that calls itself, for example, the city of St. Louis, and you have another community that calls itself the county of St. Louis. And because because there has been that sucking away of resources from the county of St. Louis, suddenly you can have a lot of resentment that, oh, they thought that they were too uppity to associate with us, that we're not good enough, that we're not, and I see this in cities such as cities that have gone through a lot of annexation of local communities and stuff. It can create this whole kind of, we don't trust you from other communities around, because are they eyeing our land? Are they eyeing our people? Who's going to be annexed next? And there's a lot of states that have strong protections against it, and there are other states that don't have strong protections against it. And a lot of times, protections against annexation have strengthened over time to where it's mostly just like, is it unincorporated county land, in which case it's a lot easier to annex in most areas. But again, you have this whole, you can almost have like this siege mentality between communities that are adjacent to one another based on where they live, even if ordinarily they would be happily, you know, going to church together and happily, having, going to the same restaurants and the same schools and the same whatever. But you start drawing these lines and saying, this is us and that is you. It changes things. It changes things a lot. And there, I think that there are kind of healthier ways to do it, but you have to have the infrastructure in place to do it. And here's a for example. I'm going to go to Indiana because I'm familiar with Indiana. I used to live in Indiana. I lived there for a number of years, and in Indiana, it's in the state constitution that if you work for a government, and it could be, city hall, it could be, uh, you know, driving for the local department, for the street department, it could be teaching, it could be you're a firefighter or you're a police officer, whatever. If your paycheck is drawn at least in part on government money in Indiana, you have to live in that jurisdiction. So, like a public school teacher has to live in the city or town or county that their school services. Same thing for police officers. Same thing for firefighters. And what that means is, and the idea I think is very good. It says that if you are going to create problems for, the community that you are like, that you're working with, that you're, like the school or the school district or the whatever jurisdiction that is that you work within, that you draw a paycheck from, you should if you mess it up, you should have to live with the consequences. There should be personal consequences on you for screwing things up for everybody else. And honestly, I really like that. But you have and if you have that, then some of these problems can kind of go away that I'm about to mention. You do, but we don't have that in Missouri. What we have is you have a large patchwork of small communities around St. Louis, around the city, the city of St. Louis and the county of St. Louis. County of St. Louis has all these little communities, all suburbs. Some of them are very rich. Some of them are very poor. Some of them are very poor because they're intentionally kept that way, and they're and like the people who work in the local city, in the local town, and maybe police officers, firefighters, whatever, don't actually live there, and they intentionally make things worse for each other. So you can have this whole, some places are really good, some things really bad, but where a lot of that comes from, in my view, is this mentality of that original mentality of, we're going to split off from the county, and then that and we're just not going to be a part of that community anymore. And that causes a lot of bad feelings. It always does. Uh, and that's something that, if Kansas City, Missouri were trying to go for something like that, they're going about it entirely the wrong way. But I don't get any sense at all that this is something for the local. What happens when the state legislature just decides that, hey, you're no longer going to be a part of this community you're going to be a part of before. We're going to forcefully separate you. And the thing is, I mean, you have people who are going to automatically suspect that this has been in the works for years, just underground. Just, it's a conspiracy, and is a suddenly sprung on them and all that. And honestly, in today's world, the whole conspiracy thing is huge, right? Everybody there's so much conspiracy stuff out there. It just boggles the mind, and you can't swat down everything. All you can do is try to speak to the the things that you personally know, that you personally experience, and can bring your own kind of rationale rational thought to, which is kind of what I'm doing here. Um, the the main the main thing is that this is something that is being pushed on Kansas City, Missouri by a state that does not like it, that does not like the fact that Kansas City, Missouri is here, that Kansas City, Missouri is here and votes blue. And if we voted red, then they would have no problem with it. But we don't. We vote blue because, well, that's what we do. We try to, create something better for one another and uplift one another instead of just saying, every person for themselves, which is not really a functional society in my viewpoint, even though a lot of people disagree with me on that, and you're free to, but this is just, hey, my, this is my channel, my views, and if you disagree, that's what the comments are for. Argue there, engage there. I'll be happy to engage right back. But right now, so right now we have this, and what happens when a state legislature comes back and says you are not allowed to legally associate with the people that you currently legal associate with? And I mean, that's not something, when I looked at the history of independent cities in the US, I could not find a single instance where a city was like separated from its county or divided without that city really being uh, without its consent. It just hasn't happened. I mean, you can have towns where suddenly you have, oh well, this is these neighbors decide they didn't like those neighbors, and so they went off and filed for their own town and blah 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 whatever. But that's even that is different than a state authority coming back and saying, no, you are no longer connected. You are no longer politically connected. Your tax bases are going to be completely separate. If you're a notary like I am, then hey, I'm gonna and this thing passes, then I got to wait for the city to set up a city clerk thing that is approved by the Secretary of State's office in order to authorize me as a notary, because that's part of what I do at work. And that's and who the heck knows how long that's going to take. And because my stamp says Jackson County, I am registered as a notary in Jackson County. Where I work is Jackson County, except it's in Kansas City, which is part of Jackson County. If that goes through, then that's going to be, and how many more duplications of that is there going to have to be in order to meet all the requirements for different regulations and laws regarding the state? And all this is coming down from like a place of essentially pure chaos. I mean, there's no framework behind it. It's not we're working behind the scenes with them to make everything go smoothly. No, it's just a matter of, we want Cleaver out of office any way that we can, and the only way we can do it is by dividing his district up more and more and more, and we hit a wall on how much we can do it by redistricting. So we're going to do it this way by passing state laws that say that he is now an outsider to everyone, to everybody outside of Kansas City. And that's gonna it'll work. That absolutely will work, because you can look at how communities work. You can look at how people kind of um, how people cultivate and how they maintain relationships, and how they and you and how they maintain identities, and you can get people to change these associations. You absolutely can. And is it a healthy thing? Oh, absolutely not. It is non-consensual with everything that 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 implies as being non-consensual. And that's a really huge problem. That is a really huge problem. And that is why I am and that's why I'm still talking about this, because to me this is a really big problem. And there will be court cases about it, I'm sure. There'll probably be a referendum about it. Maybe. Well, hopefully, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if we could like get people in like Joplin and Neosho and all the different places around the state that would have to agree for a referendum. I don't know if we can do that. Um, but certainly there would be court cases and stuff. Man, it's a mess. It is a mess. They're just throwing stuff out there to try to find any way to disrupt things, and they're completely heedless of any consequences on the people. And that is really, and that it's hard to characterize that, right? It's hard to characterize that because that's something that we haven't really seen in this country. It's basically, governance by wrecking ball. It's just there is no thought to it. Kind of like the whole penny thing with oh, we're just going to stop minting pennies, and we're not going to give any guidance as to how banks should deal with this, how retailers should deal with this, how states should deal with this, because you're not in a lot of states you're not allowed to round up or down to the nearest penny or to the nearest nickel if you run out of pennies. It says that, prices have to be, and things like credit cards and checks are not are not are not being altered. So in a lot of places they have regulations that say that the credit card price has to be the same price as a cash price. So you can't, if you round one, you can't and all these things require like programming changes and regulatory approvals and all this stuff. And all of that would ordinarily be handled through like guidance from above of this is how we're handling this changeover. And there's nothing, pure chaos. And so everybody's just having to figure things out. Some companies move faster than others, just because of the nature of it. But at the end of the day, nobody wants to be taken to court by a state because you did something you shouldn't do, because that seemed like the most logical way to handle this situation. Oh, but you chose wrong, but we're not going to give you any guidance as to how to do it. You just do it, and then we tell you when you're wrong when we come after you. And there's a specific term that I've heard by that, heard that, which is not which is uh, uh, instead of rule of law, ruling by law, which is kind of, which is what what this whole thing is about. And that's pretty much all I got for you today. I just wanted to follow up and go, okay, so how many of these? Let's look at the historical cases. Let's look at all of and there aren't any. There aren't any. Nothing. There have been no examples of the kinds of thing that they're proposing here that has ever been done in this country. None. None. And honestly, I'm astonished at that. Well done. You found a new way to break things in a way that nobody found has done before. And I inside I'm a chaos goblin. I just have to I that is such a chaos goblin move, and it's not even intentional on their part, which is what makes it so horrible, because uh it's going to be a while picking up the pieces if this falls through, if this goes through. I'm hoping it doesn't. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any serious sign of it advancing, but by God, it better not advance, because this is just going to upset so many systems. Anyway, if you like what you saw, You can well, like, subscribe. Hoping to get 10 subscribers, please. And drop a comment if you want to support me with my affordable housing initiative. I got a link to the Patreon in there. I'm pretty much a one-man show right now. And but one thing that I do have is I'm setting up this may not be set up on my Patreon immediately, but I'm this close away from having my own embroidered shirts to sell with the which I think I don't know. To me, that's just like how many creators out there are like embroider have their own like embroidered stuff that they do themselves. I think that's awesome. Um, I'm in the process of like that of testing that out, and once I'm there, it'll be available on my Patreon for sale if people want to buy them and support me that way. And y'all have a wonderful day. Appreciate you watching and continue being awesome.